welcome you to semester one's continuation of our ubiquitous mathematics seminar series, where we invite guests from all across the globe to share their work with us, their current research. And we appreciate your presence here this morning, everyone who's online thus far. We expect others to join us as the talk goes on. And in particular, we're gracious to our presenter this morning, Dr. Maria Vasilyeva, who hails from Texas A&M University in Corpus Christi, Texas, United States of America. And she's in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics at Texas A&M University. And she's here with us this morning to speak on the topic Multiscale Model Order Reduction for Applied Problems in Heterogeneous Media. So without further ado, we want to say thanks in advance to Dr. Maria Vasilyeva. And Dr. Vasilyeva, the floor is yours. And we expect an interesting talk at the end, which we'll have some questions and a slide conversation. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for invitation and this opportunity to give a talk about my research on multiscale methods. And if you talk about multiscale methods, it's all about heterogeneous media. Okay, in many real-world applications, many problems occur in heterogeneous media. It means your properties, for example, diffusion coefficient is highly heterogeneous, and you must construct very fine grid to resolve it and solve it numerically. For example, one of the biggest application of it is subsurface flow for oil and gas production, or you can consider some composite materials with very complex microscale structure. And to solve it numerically, you construct very fine grid, which lead to the very large system of linear equation after linearization and after approximation by time. And it's computationally expensive to solve. Then, for such type of problems with heterogeneous properties, we construct some special techniques to solve it accurately and numerically efficiently, computationally efficiently. And for such cases, you use upscaling or homogenization techniques or different type of multiscale methods. In such methods, instead of using very fine grid, you want to use coarser mesh with fewer degrees of freedom, but still want to have that accuracy to capture all small scale behavior. And then the main problem in such physics in heterogeneous media, that when you solve it on coarse grid, that doesn't resolve your physical scale, and we want to construct some computationally efficient approximation, but on coarse grid. For example, we can divide it into 3 different types. First type is more analytical type, and it can be derived by asymptotic to scale expansion from microscale structure. For example, if you have Darcy flow, which describe flow in porous media, such flow is already a result of upscaling. It can be derived by upscaling in one period. You just assume that your porous media is periodic. Then you have Stokes flow or Navier-Stokes flow, then you calculate average flux. Then instead of solving Navier-Stokes equation with very fine grid, fine scale resolution, you solve it on very coarse grid, but instead of using Navier-Stokes equation, you use Darcy flow or some nonlinear Darcy, generalized Darcy flow. Or if you have some fractured media, then you can upscale and construct analytically your coarse scale model, and it gives you double porosity model. Or if you consider bioparallelisticity model, it's also come from upscaling of microscopic fluid structure interaction model, and so on. There are a lot of applications in physics. And if your media is non-periodic, then you cannot construct such analytical model for one period. Then you do it numerically, and you should calculate for each heterogeneity for each cell, for example, and calculate effective properties. But for some type of problems like fractured media or high contrast media, such upscaling give you very bad results because it doesn't capture your microscale features. And for such type of problem, we can derive some multiscale methods. There are many different type of multiscale methods. For example, multiscale finite element methods, heterogeneous multiscale methods, multiscale finite volume methods, and so on. And my talk is about multiscale methods for or upscaling for heterogeneous problem. And as the first part, I start with overview of basic techniques, more common techniques like numerical homogenization, upscaling, and multiscale finite element methods. After that, I present my current research area. It's related to developing special generalized multiscale finite element methods and non-local multi-continuum methods. There are two different type of methods. It give you different type of approximation, but both of them based on finite element methods, and you can construct multiscale basis function to capture all your microscale feature. But in one approach, it's based on spectral problem. In another approach, it's more built on intuition when you know where is your continuum on the fine grid, which macroscale parameters you want to have on your coarse scale model. Then I will talk about decoupling of such multi-continuum problems using constructing explicit-implicit scheme. Then I will talk about solving it exactly on the fine grid, but you can use constructed multiscale method as a preconditional. For example, for symmetric system, you can use conjugate gradient, preconditional conjugate gradient iterative solver, and use this multiscale approximation as a preconditional and construct very good, very fast, contrast-independent solver. Then I will end with applications and conclusion. Okay, let's start. What is multiscale technique? Main problem. We want to solve our problem on the coarse grid that doesn't resolve the physical scales. And here on these figures, you can see this is our coarse grid. Here, for example, 10 by 10 coarse grid, but inside coarse cell, you have very complex microscale structure. And your grid is very coarse, it doesn't resolve that microscale structure. And how to construct coarse scale approximation if you cannot resolve your microscale structure. Actually, for many applications, it's even not possible to resolve it. Then what you can do, as I mentioned before, you can use, if you consider periodic media, you can use some analytical approaches based on asymptotic two-scale expansion and derive your model. Or if your media is non-periodic, like in these figures, then you can use homogenization or some upscaling technique. Then you can move to multiscale methods. And the main idea in this multiscale simulation to extract essential microscale formation in each local domain and capture by macroscale characteristics. And here's the first example for numerical homogenization. Let's say we have very simple, the basic model parabolic equation. It's linear parabolic equation, and we have heterogeneous property. For example, it can describe surface flow in porous media, where K is permeability coefficient. And it's different for each point in your domain. Then what you can do, you want to solve this equation numerically because you cannot solve it analytically. It's multi-dimensional case, it's three-dimensional or two-dimensional. Then what we can do, we can use finite element methods, resolve all heterogeneity, construct our mass matrix, stiffness matrix, and derive such system which you want to invert on each time iteration. And because it's finite element methods, you can define your global matrices as a sum of local matrices in each local domain. Local domain for this case is just cell, coarse cell. Then in each coarse cell, based on basic finite element methods, just can be derived as follows. But what we do if we want to solve on coarse grid, we do not resolve our heterogeneity. And inside, it's very heterogeneous properties. Then what we can do? Then instead of, because now we do not resolve our heterogeneous k of x, then instead of k of x, we calculate some k star, just upscale properties, efficient properties. How we calculate them? We calculated, for example, if we have time, coefficient for time derivative, or it can be coefficient for reaction term, because it doesn't contain derivatives, you can average it. Just use regular average. Calculate average coefficient in your local domain K, coarse cell, just calculate this average coefficient and divide it by volume. It gives you average value. But for permeability, it's not good approach. Of course, you can use same thing, but for this case, to obtain more accurate solution, you should use average fluxes. But you should know these fluxes. Then to calculate such fluxes in each local domain, you solve local problem in each coarse cell. For example, you can use this steady state equation with heterogeneous properties, put some linear boundary condition, for example, flow from left to right, or it can be velocity as Neumann boundary condition from left to right. Then you calculate flux on each local domain by resolving all small-scale heterogeneity, and you capture all this small-scale feature in this upscaled parameter. In two-dimensional case, you will have three numbers, K11, K22, and K12, and it's symmetric for appropriate boundary condition. Because of it, we have three instead of four, because it's symmetric. Then you capture all small-scale heterogeneity by only three numbers. For regular cases, for not very high contrast properties, then such upscaling can work very well, and you can obtain very good results, but not for high contrast properties. Another approach is related on finite volume approximation. It's still upscaling, homogenization, but it depends on what approximation you want to use on coarse grid. If you suppose that you want to use finite volume methods, it's quite usual for subsurface flow, then your local domain is different. It contains two cells, and you have interface between two cells. Then your upscale parameter now it's called transmissibility. T star, it's defined on coarse grid, and it's calculated by solving local problem in each domain omega I. Then you put some linear boundary conditions, just flow from left to right, and you, instead of T star, you put average flux on your interface. Then it's give you quite good approximation for simple heterogeneity. Another third approach based on finite element methods. In finite element methods, you can calculate effective tensor with effective properties, or you can incorporate it inside multiscale, inside basis function. Instead of using P1 or piecewise linear basis function like hot function, you can make it heterogeneous. You can construct it by solving local problems, steady state local problem, and give your linear basis function as a boundary condition. Then it can know about microscale feature in your local domain and give you some sufficiently good approximation for simple heterogeneity on the coarse grid. Just three examples of coarse model construction based on approximation. But my talk is more about generalizing this approach and come up to multi-continuum case. And it's about, let me start with generalized multiscale finite element methods. I still construct multiscale basis function, but now I use spectral properties. I use eigenvectors. Why? Let's start with motivation. For example, if we have very complex heterogeneity, like fractured media, or you can have very high contrast properties, like this domain. In blue subdomain, you can have coefficient which related, for example, heat conductivity of plastic or something, and you have some inclusion, metal inclusion, then heat conductivity can be much, much larger. It gives you high contrast properties for composite material, for example. Then previous approaches doesn't work for such complex heterogeneity. Or this example for SPE10 test case, it's a very famous test problem for subsurface flow in reservoir simulation, again, with very high contrast properties. And we have some channels. Or you can have some more complex network model. I will talk about it a little bit at the end of the presentation. Okay, and for such special case of heterogeneity, which is quite common in application, previous techniques like numerical homogenization, upscaling, or multiscale method doesn't work. Why? Because you cannot capture your microscale behavior using only one characteristic in each local domain. It's not enough. For such problem, you should come up with multiple macroscale characteristics. It means you need to have multiple equations on the coarse grid to capture each subdomain, for example. And how we define these macroscale characteristics, parameters in systematic way? It's based on multi-continuum approach. The main idea is to prescribe several effective media and formulate separate models, separate equations for each continuum. And of course, they have complex interaction between them because they interact. You have flow from one subdomain to another subdomain. But how we can systematically identify such channels or fracture or continuum? Then we use generalized multiscale finite element method. In these methods, we can use generalized eigenvalue problems in each local domain to define and find such macroscale characteristic. Okay, to start describing this method, let me consider some test case. Very good test problem is related to flow in fractured porous media. It's very thin fracture, and for such problem, usually your macroscale problem can be already a multi-continuum problem. You can have separate equation for porous matrix, for background media, and for very thin fracture, where flow is very fast. Then you have coupling term between them. It's fine grid to resolve all your small scale fracture or heterogeneity on the grid level. Then you use, for example, finite element approximation. It's up to you, or you can use finite volume or finite difference and construct discrete system. But size of the system is very large. Then, before moving forward, let me generalize this model in the following way. Just define multi-continuum model. Alpha from 1 to L, you can have multiple continuum. For example, if you can consider gas flow, shale gas flow in fractured media, then you can have not just two continuum porous matrix and fracture, you can have also some wax cavities, you can have some kerogen, etc. Many different layers of heterogeneity. And for each level of heterogeneity, you can construct some hierarchical model with separate equation for each heterogeneity type. And this model is very accurate, but up when you resolve your heterogeneity. Just same thing. This matrix model. Okay, let's consider just two continuum, porous matrix, and fracture. We use finite element methods, and we come up with following discrete system. And this fine grid. Then instead of solving this very fine grid, which is presented in this figure, with a lot of unknowns, we want to solve on the very coarse grid, let's say 10 by 10 coarse grid. How we can do it? We can do it using finite element methods. In finite element methods, you can capture all your microscale characteristics in basis function. But in this case, we say that one basis function, it's not enough. We want to have several basis functions in each local domain. Then we define following local problem. We have following local problem. We solve it in each local domain, put all possible boundary conditions related after constructing basis function, you want to connect it with global model, and you want to capture all possible flow from another regions. Because of it, we put just all possible boundary condition in some local domain. Domain is local, mesh still resolve fine grid resolution, but size of the system is very small. It's related to local domain. We solve it, and after solving it, we solve, let me use this slide. We solve local spectral problem. We solve following generalized eigenvalue problem on snapshot space. We call it snapshot space solution in local domain with all possible boundary conditions. Then we extract only few basis function which related to eigenvectors corresponding to smallest eigenvalues. And here is the illustration. If we have such local domain, this example of solution of snapshots with all possible boundary conditions. And we can see where is your fracture located. Then we extract main feature by solving generalized eigenvalue problem on snapshot space. And this is your 3 eigenvectors. First is constant because of the nature of the snapshot space. And it's related to background media. All others more related to fracture. It incorporates fracture flow in your core scale model. Then, because we use Galerkin approach for coarse grid coupling, we multiply it to multiscale partition of unity function and obtain these 3 basis functions. Instead of using one in classical finite element methods, now we construct several. And we can do it adaptively. This algorithm based on eigenvalues can automatically identify how many continua, how many macroscale parameters you should have on the coarse grid. And here is an example. This fine grid solution based on this fine scale multiscale basis function in each local domain. They are local. We construct projection matrix or restriction matrix, and we can use it to project your coarse scale, fine scale model on the coarse grid. But at the same time, because it's Galerkin approach, you can use it to prolongate your coarse scale solution on the fine grid back. Because of it here, your coarse scale solution give you, it's like solution on the fine grid. But technically, you solve it on the coarse grid with very small number of degrees of freedom. This solution comes from solving this fine grid resolution with 6,600 unknowns. But this solution used on generalized multiscale finite element methods, and we use only 8 basis functions per local domain to capture all small scale features, and our core scale model contains only 288 unknowns. Very small problem. Of course, you can solve it more efficiently, and solving can be very fast. But in this method, because we can vary number of basis functions, then we can see accuracy. If we take only one basis function, of course, your solution is not accurate. This L2 error and this energy error or H1 error. And we can see one basis function for fractured media is not enough. MSFM or multiscale finite element method is not good for solving such problem. But if you take more basis function, like taking more macro scale characteristic in your coarse model, then you can obtain very good approximation with less than 1% of error. And this result for 5x5 coarse grid and 10x10 coarse grid. And this, I did it a long time ago, like how many years? 8 years ago. And we also come up with some simplified approach. Instead of solving spectral problem, For fractured media, you can use this simplified basis function and construct basis function for each fracture in each local domain. And we can obtain very good approximation. We can use adaptively, do it adaptively, and define number of basis function in each local domain independently and can be different. For example, in such homogeneous domain, like right lower corner, we can have only one basis function. There are no fracture here. But in another domain, we can have, for example, 4 or 8 basis functions. Then we can reduce number degrees of freedom and we can obtain very accurate solution. Another approach, sometimes your problem is non-linear. It's not sometimes, it usually happens with real-world application. Then you can construct some special type of basis function. Based on the residual, you can pre-construct your offline. We call it offline. It's pre-constructed. Pre-constructed basis function before for your given heterogeneity. But if your problem is non-linear, then you can add one more basis function based on the residual. Just add one basis function to capture your, for example, non-linearity. Then such approach can reduce your error very fast, but sometimes it's computationally not very effective. And then if you solve non-linear problem or time-dependent problem, you can do it not on every time step, only sometimes to reduce your error. But it works and reduction of error is huge. Then we come up with another idea of, because behind all that approaches, we just saw that what is the main problem, why regular upscaling technique doesn't work for high contrast properties. It's because of macroscale characteristic. It's not enough to have only one macroscale characteristic or continuum on your coarse grid. You need to have several. And how you can define it using previous methods, you can define it by solving generalized spectral eigenvalue problem, spectral problem or eigenvalue problem. But instead of solving eigenvalue problem, which is expensive, we can intuitively understand how many continuum we should have in each local domain. For example, in this picture with 3 fracture, because 2 fracture are intersecting, we should have 3 basis functions, one for background, one for lower fracture, and third basis for this intersecting fracture. Then if we have 3 macroscale characteristics to capture this local domain, it must give you good solution. And for this case, heterogeneous properties with 3 subdomains, we also should have 3 basis function corresponded to flow in each subdomain. Or in perforated domains with some non-homogeneous boundary condition, we can define additional basis, like additional continuum to capture non-homogeneous boundary condition. And how we can do it without solving spectral problem? We can use this non-local multi-continuum upscaling approach. It's not just good because we do not solve spectral problem, but it's good also because we obtain coarse scale model, same as in upscaling with physical meaning. You can use this coarse scale model. It's physically meaningful, and in the same way, it's very accurate because we solve and construct our basis function in non-local domain. We take all non-local interaction for high contrast properties. And to construct basis function, here again, example for fracture media, what we do, we take local domain, it's red square, it's coarse cell, we construct oversampled domain by adding few layers of coarse grids around your coarse cell. And in each K coarse cell, we see how many we can numerically identify, analytically, intuitively identify how many continua we should have. And here we can see we have background media and 1 fracture. And how we define it? We use constraint. We solve our local problem for steady state flow in local domain, but we add constraint. And this constraint is related to continuum. First constraint related to first basis function. We want to have average solution equal to 1 in local domain for first continuum, porous matrix. Then we solve it with another boundary constraint and say that we want to have average value of your function in fracture equal to 1 in another domain. And for all other subdomains, we want to have averages equal to 0. This is the way how we define our macro scale characteristics. Then we can construct non-local because we solve it not in coarse cell, we solve it in oversampled domain, then it can capture all interaction between coarse cells. It gives you very good approximation. Again, we use projection approach, we construct restriction matrix to project our fine grid matrices onto coarse grid, solve it on coarse grid, and come back to fine scale resolution. If it's needed, you can still use your coarse scale model and solve it. And here is just flowchart. Approach is same, just projection matrix. Like in multi-grid methods, you have restriction and prolongation, but here we have not only one variable for each local domain, we can define several, as much as it's needed in each local domain to capture each continuum or macroscale characteristic. And here is the results for fractured media. We can see coarse scale solution, and solution is very accurate. This second row related to barriers. You can put property for a fracture as put some very small numbers. It's related to like barriers, or you can use some hybrid fracture, some of them high permeable, some of them low permeable. And this 40 by 40 coarse grid, we used NLMC, non-local multi-continuum approach, and we obtained very good result with 0.2% of relative L2 error on the coarse grid. Then, because it's a physically meaningful model on the coarse grid, you can, if it's still too fine for you, and you want to coarsen it even more, you can use GMS film on the top of it, like 3 levels, or you can use NLMC one more time, like multi-level in multi-grid approach, but this related to coarse grid approximation, not precondition. And we obtain again very good results. We can capture all small scale heterogeneity. Then, because all these approaches say that to have good coarse scale approximation, you must consider and construct multi-continuum model on the coarse grid. Then you can have good approximation. But for such multi-continuum models, it's still computationally expensive to solve. If your coarse grid is too fine, or even your fine grid, it's already multi-continuum. Then for this approach, you can construct some efficient splitting technique. You can split each continuum, like in this figure, like porous matrix, small scale fracture, natural fracture, and some large scale fracture, like hydraulic fracture. Each of continuum characterized by own permeability. And if you construct big system like here, then if you use iterative solver, number of iterations can be very large because contrast of properties is large. And how we can make it better? It's just regular approach, implicit approximation. I just write it for linear multi-step scheme for high order in general case. Then to construct more effective algorithm, we use implicit explicit approximation. If you know that each continuum characterized by each own property, we can decouple them, solve in each continuum separately, and there are no high contrast problem in each continuum inside. The number of iterations can be small. I will show you my numerical results. And after solving in each continuum separately, you can couple it. How you do it? You use additive representation of your matrix and just split it in this way. It's just implicit linear multi-step scheme. We take this part related to block diagonal parts for each continuum from current time step or approximated implicitly, and all interaction you can move it from previous time step or approximate it explicitly. Then you can construct very efficient numerical algorithm. And here is the result. I consider 2 continuum approach and 3 continuum approach. This fine grid, I resolve all my small scale heterogeneity. Contrast of my properties very large, and it's computationally expensive. Why? We can look to number of iterations. It's not very large problem. Let's consider 3 continuum. We have in average on each iteration to solve such problem. Oh, it's time. Oh, it's time of, oh, here, number of iteration. To solve on each iteration, you should do 1,100 iteration on each time step because it's high contrast. But if you split it and solve in each continuum separately, the number of iteration become very small, much smaller. This number is large, but it's number of degrees of freedom for third continuum, which is related to lower dimensional structure, is small, then it's still effective. Then your error is very small, and you reduce number of iteration because you split based on heterogeneity. And you can construct very efficient algorithm. You can apply it for multi-scale approximation, like an LMC approximation. And this approach is work because this LMC approximation give you very accurate approximation. Some coarse grid, but still high contrast, and you can construct efficient algorithm. And you can find it in my paper, my recent paper in JCP journal. Then I constructed for general cases, for multi-step methods, not just first order implicit scheme, and you can extend it for second order and etc. Then we can see that it works very well, and we can obtain very good results. Let me go faster. And it's reduced, of course, if you reduce number of iteration, you reduce time of solution. It's all connected. But it's also, we can develop it further. And instead of using implicit explicit time approximation, you can use this splitting as a preconditioner. And it's called iterative approach, like sequential non-iterative sequential splitting and iterative sequential splitting. Then you can converge your iteration. And here I just look different solvers for decoupled scheme, for coupled scheme, and we see that for coupled scheme for larger system, even multi-grid method doesn't converge because it contains high contrast property, this contrast. But if you decouple it, number of iteration, it's not very small, but you converge. You can obtain solution by decoupling your each continuum. Then we come up with another new idea. This paper is still in preparation. And in this approach, we just say, if we construct our coarse scale model, why we cannot move our direction to multi-grid approach? Why we are not using our very accurate multi-continuum coarse scale approximation as a preconditioner? Because for some type of problems, multi-grid algebraic AMG method doesn't work, but our method works very well because it's based on spectral problem and it's based on very accurate representation of your coarse scale characteristic. Then we come up with this new idea. It's called two-grid algorithm. And instead of solving coarse scale model, we use it as a preconditioner. Then we use it as a precondition for conjugate gradient methods, iterative solver, well-known iterative solver, and we use our coarse model as a precondition. With some smoothing iteration, of course, it's necessary for multi-scale solver, or it's also necessary for regular multi-grid approach. And what we see, if we consider high contrast properties like fractured media, we can see if contrast is large, then multi-grid method doesn't work. I just tested aggregation-based multi-grid methods. But if we use our very accurate multi-continuum representation on the coarse grid, then we can obtain algorithm where number of iteration is contrast independent. And it can converge with few iterations, very efficient solver. And you obtain fine grid solution. And this result is still in preparation. We will submit it soon, almost ready. And let me end with this application. Considerate approach is very general. It's based on spectral problem in general case, or you can come up with intuition. You can define your core scale characteristic based on intuition. If you engineer, you can say what is really needed to capture on the coarse grid. Then we apply this method for different type of application. For example, we applied for elasticity problem in fractured media. Now we have not just flow, we have elasticity equation. And this system is coupled. It's biased per elasticity problem in fractured media. We construct multiscale basis function, spectral multiscale basis function for displacement also. We did it for GMSVM, we did it for NLMC. We apply this for geothermal reservoir simulation. When we have not just flow, we have heat flow. And we did it for NLMC, GMSVM, and everything worked very well. We can capture all our macroscale feature on the coarse grid model. We apply it for reactive transport in marine sediment. And here we combine it with different time approximation techniques. Here I used splitting techniques to decouple my highly nonlinear coupled reaction term from transport. And it also works very well. We apply it for elasticity wave in fractured porous media. And in fractured porous media, we use discontinuous Galerkin. You can use for any fine grid approximation. And again, spectral approach can capture all small scale feature. And you can construct very accurate core scale model for many different physics. For Helmholtz equation, for seismic wave propagation. We also apply it for lithium-ion batteries, where we have discontinuity on the interface between electrolyte and porous media, and cathode and anode. And here we use GMSVM method, and it's also capture all these small scale feature. If you consider some microscale structure, then you come up with perforated domain, another type of heterogeneity. We apply it for Darcy flow, with transport. We consider it three-dimensional case with some heterogeneous inclusion like composite materials. For NLMC, GMSVM, we did it for Darcy-Brinkman-Forchheimer flow. We did it for thin domain like vein or vessels with Navier-Stokes flow inside. And we did it with non-homogeneous boundary condition like reaction boundary condition on your perforations. And approach is very general. Then this is my recent research area. I'm working to generalize it even more. And I'm thinking that it can be applied for network model, discrete network model, graph model, to expand my application, because such models already discrete. It's not partial differential equation, it's discrete equation. And it can describe many different physics, like in different area, like epidemiological model, some medical application, fibrous material, pore network simulation, electric power system, river network traffic flow, and so on. Many more different applications, even in social science. But in this case, you define your model on the graph and you have connectivity. And you can use it in same approach. You can construct upscaling. Instead of solving network model on the graph, you can upscale it on the continuum scale using our approach, multi-continuum approach. Then here flow is very similar And it's like in multi-grid methods, I saw some papers that they also apply multi-grid for graph models, but we know that multi-grid not always work. But here I want to construct something more general, which can work for any physics, any more complicated physics. And this my recent result is just accepted for publication in this week. And you can find some different test cases in this paper. Okay, so 11:52, let me do conclusion. And what we presented in this presentation, we presented some spectral approach. We know that spectral problem can identify macroscale characteristics, and you can use it to construct basis function. But based on that one, we can build our intuition on macroscale variables and can define it and give some physical meaning for coarse scale model. Then we come up with non-local multi-continuum methods, which give you physically meaningful coarse scale model. Your coarse scale model is type of multi-continuum model. If you want to construct efficient solver, you can use decoupling techniques based on implicit explicit time approximation. You can use this very accurate coarse scale model as a preconditional. And we apply it for different application, and we are still working on extension of these methods for discrete network model. And I'm trying to connect this approach with multi-grid approach, consider multi-level thing, and try to catch some physics where multi-grid doesn't work. For example, for transport problem, we have non-symmetric matrices. For non-symmetric matrices, it's very hard to construct very good preconditioner, but our spectral problem can do it. But of course, you should define some symmetric matrix. It's related to least square methods or normal equation, but it's possible, and we're still working on it for neuron transport, reactive transport. For anisotropic flow, it also looks very good. We considered some case with magnetic field for fusion problem, tokamak problem. And I want to come up with some very algebraic unified approach to constructing coarse scale model for any fine grid approximation or any discrete system, and construct something more general based on multi-continuum approach, which can work for larger class of problems. And thank you for your attention. Any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Vasilyeva. Very interesting talk and some beautiful applications at the end there that I'm sure has our interest piqued. So at this stage, we're going to open the floor to our audience. I'm sure they will have some interesting questions. So folks, the floor is open. So please go ahead and pose your questions to Dr. Maria Vasilyeva. We're not hearing you. We're not hearing you, Victor. We're not hearing you.
Hello? Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we're hearing you now. We're hearing you now.
Okay. Yeah, my mic was muted. Sorry about that. Okay, so Dr. Vasilyeva, I hope I pronounced that correctly. I found that your presentation was very interesting. It touched on a lot of things that that I'm interested in my research area, which happens to be associated as being finite element methods and application to fluid dynamics problems, porous media, etc. So I found a lot of the things that you spoke about today quite interesting. I was wondering one thing, well, among others, but one thing I was wondering in particular for the generalized multiscale FEM, approach that you discussed. You would have mentioned that it would have been following a Galerkin-based approximation procedure. For the case of fractured porous media in particular, would you have required, or maybe is it even possible in that problem to have assumed continuity between the, I guess, the different, I would say the small scale versus the large scale sections of the domain? I just wanted to get a bit of clarity on that. If continuity, as it typically is, was still assumed in that case.
Actually not. We consider it also for discontinuous case when you have, instead of high permeable fracture, if you have low permeable fracture, it gives you discontinuity of solution. Then spectral problem can capture it. And of course, your fine grid approximation must be constructed based here. So like you can see it's discontinuous solution between each domain. It of course, if you construct fine grid model, it should be accurate model. You should capture it. You should use discontinuous Galerkin, or if you use discrete fracture model, then you should know about this discontinuity and must capture in fine grid model. And if your fine grid approximation is correct and capture your discontinuity, then you move to basis construction. And in basis construction, you use same like submatrix with same approximation, but in smaller domain. Then if you solve spectral problem, it's construct discontinuous basis function. It can capture inside it. Spectral problem know everything.
Okay, so discontinuous based methods can work for
Yes.
this type of is applicable. I would imagine that it would be significantly more tedious, perhaps, for this type of multi-scale approach. So maybe it's not as popular, but I was just thinking that, especially in heterogeneous structures and materials, it might be something that that could be explored. But just to clarify again, so for your research that you would have done, you would have been able to retain continuity.
Oh, you mean on fine grid?
Meaning piecewise continuous basis functions in this.
Oh, actually, there are different type of basis function. You can connect it with continuous Galerkin, like hat function. Instead of hat function, you use your eigenvectors multiplied to partition of unity. Or on another applications, let me open it, each one. For example, in elastic wave, you have discontinuity.
Okay.
You can clearly see it. And for this case, we also used another approach. Instead of continuous Galerkin on the coarse grid, we use discontinuous Galerkin on the coarse grid. Then you can solve it in each coarse cell separately, spectral problem, and it's discontinuous on the coarse grid. You just follow finite element methods. You can use mixed on the coarse grid, discontinuous, continuous, all that thing. But capture using solving local problems to construct basis function.
Okay, understood. I have a question actually based on this slide, actually, coincidentally. And I'll make this perhaps my final question, because I know that other persons might be waiting to ask. But I'm always curious about when we have seismic wave type equations, well, hyperbolic wave type equations like this, how techniques like this, like multi-scale methods, how do they respond to the time discretization approaches that would have been used? Because it tends to be challenging to ensure stability over time for these types of methods. Like what approach would you have used, or how would you have handled, I guess, the time discretization along with this multi-scale approach for these problems?
Very, very good question. I'm glad that you asked it, because I forget to mention it. For example, for this hyperbolic, second order hyperbolic equation, you usually use explicit scheme.
Mhm.
And if you use finite element, we want to use DG, discontinuous Galerkin, because mass matrix is block diagonal. Then you can, for fine grid, efficient construction of the fine grid solver, you can invert each block of mass matrix and construct some good solver. But degrees of freedom is still very large. Then you do it on coarse grid. You use again DG, discontinuous Galerkin, mass matrix again, block diagonal, and you can invert it. But degrees, because number of unknown is smaller, you can solve it faster. But in these test cases, we use same time step size. But because size of system is smaller, you can do it faster. But
Okay.
technically, we're still working on it, but now we're working with transport problem, like CFL number. If you have CFL number, and if you use fine grid, your CFL number require very small time stepping. But if you move to coarse grid, it can allow use larger time step size. And I'm still working on it.
Yes, yes. I
But
often
it's coarse grid. Yes.
I often find these problems very well, I won't say difficult. I mean difficult, yes, but also very time consuming because of the conditional stability required and the use of small time steps in order to ensure stability, along with, well, based on the CFL condition. So about how long would it usually take to compute your solutions for this type of problem though? Like in terms of time.
On this case, for multi-scale model, it's defined on two stages. Offline stage, when you compute your basis function, but you compute them independently on each local domain. You can do it in parallel, technically.
Okay. Okay, so that's
And time of constructing related to one local domain. And local domain is small, then you can do it sufficiently fast. You construct your, but in parallel.
Okay, so that speeds it up quite a bit. Okay,
Then
good.
you construct your projection matrix, restriction matrix, project your matrix on the coarse grid, and because of size, you can solve it very fast.
Okay, this is very intriguing. Okay, this is definitely something that I'll be looking more into. I really appreciate your what you have presented today. Definitely gave some new insights to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for such a very good questions, Victor. Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Are there any more questions for Dr. Maria? Right, so Dr. Maria Vasilyeva, on behalf of the Department of Mathematics and our guest today, want to thank you very much again for what was a very interesting talk. And we would have learned a lot, and we hope that we can, interact again sometime in the future and possibly extract some collaboration between our personnel and students here at University of West Indies and personnel from your Texas A&M Corpus Christi campus. So thanks very much, and we do hope you have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you so much.
All right, and thanks to our our guests. All right, for spending your Friday morning with us. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.